In a dramatic escalation that reads like the climax of a crime thriller, South African police units have ramped up an all-out offensive against organised cash-in-transit (CIT) gangs, and this time the net appears to be closing with fatal consequences for the criminals involved. Over the past week, law enforcement sources say coordinated intelligence-led operations culminated in several violent confrontations with teams believed to be planning or executing CIT heists. In multiple incidents, police intercepted suspects during the planning stages or as they moved to execute robberies. At least one confrontation ended in a firefight that left several suspected robbers dead and others in custody, while firearms, hijacked vehicles, and explosive devices were recovered. These operations followed months of mounting pressure from authorities determined to stop a wave of increasingly brazen attacks on armored vans and security personnel. "We will not tolerate this violence," police message becomes action. Senior police spokespeople and government ministers have publicly adopted a no-nonsense stance, language that, critics warn, risks being read as a declaration of war on the gangs, but which supporters say is a necessary response to a crisis that has cost lives, paralyzed parts of the economy and fueled urban fear. Intelligence units, crime prevention task teams and specialized provincial squads are being deployed with renewed urgency. Tip-offs from community informants and surveillance assets reportedly played key roles in identifying strike targets. Within hours of receiving information, teams moved in, and the result, in at least one high-intensity encounter, was a firefight in which multiple suspects were fatally wounded and weapons caches seized. Witnesses describe chaos, sirens, tire smoke, shattered glass, and the flattened remains of what had once been a getaway vehicle. Police accounts say suspects opened fire when cornered, forcing officers to return fire in self-defense. Investigators say the gangs are heavily armed and organized, often using hijacked luxury cars, improvised explosives, and decoy vehicles to execute military-style ambushes on armored trucks. Authorities recovered rifles, magazines, and other paraphernalia at several scenes. Evidence, they say, that these are not petty criminals but sophisticated criminal networks operating across provincial borders. The public reaction is mixed and combustible. Many business owners, private security firms, and ordinary citizens who have felt besieged by a recent surge in CIT attacks welcome the tough action, describing their relief that suspected robbers were being removed from the streets. But human rights activists, civil liberties groups, and some opposition politicians are warning against a slide toward summary justice and militarized policing. They urge transparency. Every fatality must be thoroughly investigated, illegal use of force prosecuted, and courts given the chance to hold alleged criminals to account, not the headlines. International press coverage of similar past incidents has also raised questions about proportionality and the need for independent oversight. Experts point to a mix of structural and opportunistic drivers behind the boom in CIT attacks. High unemployment, easy access to stolen firearms, the profitability of seizing large sums of cash, and porous policing in certain areas have combined to make the crimes both tempting and lucrative. The private security sector, enormous in South Africa and heavily armed in many instances, fills gaps but also introduces vulnerabilities. Vehicles and cash are predictable targets, and attackers have adapted sophisticated tactics to exploit them. Recent government discussions about tighter regulation of firearms in the private security industry highlight the complex policy trade-offs at stake. What happens next? Investigations, prosecutions, and the risk of escalation. Police say investigations are ongoing and that every seized weapon, vehicle, and recovered item will be catalogued as part of criminal cases. Arrests are expected to follow for those not killed in the clashes, and prosecutors will, authorities say, pursue the strongest possible charges. But analysts warn there is no simple, quick fix. Armed gangs adapt fast, and heavier policing can provoke retaliation, territorial reprisals, or further fragmentation of criminal networks into smaller, harder-to-track cells. Civil society groups insist on one thing above all, that the rule of law be upheld. They urge independent inquests into every deadly shooting, full forensic transparency and prosecution where excessive force is found. The alternative, they argue, risks normalizing extrajudicial outcomes and deepening public mistrust in institutions already under strain. For families of the deceased, whether suspected criminals or law-abiding citizens caught in the crossfire, there is only loss. For communities, the moment is bitter. Some feel safer now that alleged gang leaders have been struck, others fear this is only the start of an escalating cycle. For the state, the rhetoric of war may rally resources and public support, but it also brings responsibility to investigate, to adjudicate, and to rebuild trust. Whatever the immediate outcomes in courtrooms and police briefings, these events mark a turning point in South Africa's long and difficult struggle with organized armed crime. The streets will remember the sirens and smoke. The country must now decide whether the path forward is a temporary showdown or the start of sustained reforms that address the root causes of the violence.